Welcome back, basketball fans. Hopefully, it's not too dark for you. Uh, it's daytime, but I just don't want to turn too many lights on and throw the background off. But let me know what you think, if it's too dark or if it's okay for you. But obviously, we're here during the best time of the year, March Madness, the Final Four. This year, unexpectedly, has went pretty close to script, right? Two of the top teams, both in the finals, Purdue and UConn. For women's basketball, similar, right? You have Iowa and obviously South Carolina. UConn, a perennial contender, who, if they didn't have injuries this year, probably would have been far higher seeded as well. And then, of course, you have the consistent underdog story. In this case, North Carolina State. North Carolina State in both the men's and women's. And of course, Alabama, which also is a bit of a surprise this year as well, even though if you watch my earlier videos, you know I was really high on the SEC. After watching tons of SEC games this year, I was very confident with the star-studded teams that they had, as well as the great defensive and tough tenacity these teams showed. And going through a conference like that with such depth and competitiveness, I figured it was really going to help them prepare for the Final Four. But unfortunately, picking Kentucky to win it all probably was too much of a fanboy move for me and ended up costing me my pool. But for the rest of you, hopefully your pool is still in good shape. Hopefully you have Purdue and UConn in the final. In my work pool, one of our new employees, another Canadian like myself, who's also a little older and been watching college basketball for a long time, he is now leading. But the South African girl consistently who does well on my pools, surprisingly so, she can win it all if Purdue ends up pulling it out. So we'll see what ends up happening. Leave in the comment section below, who did you pick to win the Final Four? So let's get to this. So obviously UConn is the odds out favorite to repeat. And you know, their squad has looked great. I made a video earlier on this year talking about how incredible they looked. This was coming off of one of the best performances of a college basketball team I've seen in a long time, when everything was just clicking. They looked unbeatable, and they really did look like the team that was going to take it all. And at that point, I was super confident that this team was just going to roll over everybody and end up winning. But then in the very next game, right after I made the video, they ended up losing to Marquette and showed that no matter how good a team can be, there's still hurdles and issues you need to get through. But in the long run, that loss to Marquette was probably a saving grace for this UConn squad, showing that they can rebound off of losses such as that. And nothing against Marquette, also a very good team who performed very well in this tournament as well. This team now is being hyped as potentially the best college basketball team of all time, Jay Williams. I think when you make those kind of statements, you're kind of forgetting the history of the sport. Historically, teams tended to be older teams. Players tended to stay 3 or 4 years. And because of that, team chemistry and depth was much better than it is today for the most part, because players weren't jumping out after 1 or 2 years in college. They had to stay 4 years, sometimes 3 years. So at that point, these teams were stellar, deep, experienced, right? The same experience we're getting from teams now that have this same sort of experience that they're bringing to it. They're able to capitalize against younger teams. But if you want to compare them to teams from other eras, other years, they don't have any advantages over those teams, because those teams also were very experienced as well. The one good thing you can say about this UConn team, even though they are experienced, last year's team was really quite different than this year's, right? The starting guards were different, you know, another big man, you know, things have really changed and they adapted very well. These players who obviously were on the bench last year have all filled into their new roles and done very well. And this is compliments obviously to Hurley, who's been a great coach for this team. And at this point, I am favoring them to win. As I said, if I would have just signed my bracket after that video I made a few months ago, I would have had them to run through everyone. But unfortunately, you keep watching and keep being manipulated by what you watch. And this obviously made me change my perspective. So let's get to this. So this would be them being a repeat team. And there's only been two other repeat teams in college basketball history of the most recent era of basketball, and that was Duke and Florida. And some people are expecting that this team potentially is the best. Everybody has an opinion, but out of all these teams, I definitely have to ride with Florida Gators. I was a big fan of this team. Brewer, Horford, Noah, the guards as well. Dupay, however you say his name. This was also a great team with great depth, great guard play, and just quality coaching at that time. For UConn, this is nothing against them. I mean, if they do what these teams have done before them, that's a huge accomplishment, for them. Obviously, UConn has always sort of been in the back mirror to the female team, right? And the women's team obviously has gotten tons of praise, tons of attention because of the dominance they had in college basketball. Obviously, when they came through college basketball, it was not nearly as competitive as what the men had to go through. But UConn's men's team has consistently put out great teams year after year after year. Even when they fall back a little, they're still competitive, and it doesn't take long before they end up surprising people once again. And that's what they are. They're a team that comes out, surprises people. This year, it's a little different. This year's team has gotten a lot of praise and attention. And I wonder how that's going to move them forward in the next few games, because obviously the pressure is mounting, everything to lose right now. Purdue, on the other hand, is a perfect example of that, led by my Canadian big man. They were one of the best teams last year. He was player of the year, and then they ended up losing the first game in the March Madness tournament. And obviously had to go home feeling dejected and totally disappointed in their performance. I mean, and this consistently happens in March Madness. That's what makes it so great. These kind of upsets do happen. And it's so surprising, so unexpected, yet being somebody that's filled out brackets for 40 something years, you sort of expect it nonetheless. And if you go with it, sometimes it'll blow up in your face. But if you don't expect it, then the same can happen. Last year was a huge year for that. And I'm sure everybody that is watching this video remembers the destruction their brackets took. Purdue, though, this year has bounced back fantastically, has done exactly what people thought they were going to do last year, right? Be a team, move forward, not necessarily win the tournament, even though there's lots of expectations for Purdue's big man specifically, because he is a 3-time player of the year. He's putting up numbers that, if you look at, haven't been done in 56 years, right? 1968, when, who was it? I can't remember what player, but that was the last time a player was putting up 30 points and 15 rebounds in March Madness. And that's what he's doing now. And that's fantastic. But at the same time, if your team doesn't win, you end up coming under scrutiny. You look at Ralph Sampson as an example. He was also a 3-time player of the year for Virginia. Virginia was not able to win the tournament, and consistently he was scrutinized and criticized because of this lack of accomplishment. Obviously, for Zach, it's a similar situation. If he's not able to at least get to the final, there's going to be a lot of scrutiny for his team, and specifically him underperforming. If he wins, then that monkey's off his back. We see this far more often with, obviously, NBA, when guys like Giannis had lots of pressure being an MVP, but people were asking, so when are you going to win the league? He won it. Obviously, then pressure subsided. For the Joker, it was similar. People were saying, you don't deserve a 3rd MVP award in a row. You haven't won the title. That year, he ends up winning the title. So, this kind of scrutiny consistently is something that media and fans put on players. For Zach Edney, it's no different. And Purdue obviously has a lot of pressure to step up and perform the way people expect them to. And going into this tournament, they perform fantastic. They've gotten great depth off of the bench. They really showed that they are a team, right? And that's really what's important when you get to March Madness, and specifically these kind of games where maybe you don't have a lot of opportunity to prepare for your opponent. Uh, Obviously, they have a specific way of playing, inside out, a much more sort of old-fashioned style of basketball, not really played as much now as at one time when this was the staple. This was what every team tried to do. UConn is similar in that they obviously have Klingon, who's a very big man as well. For me, I'd love to see Purdue, UConn in the final, see these two big men match up, see the guards match up as well. And then, at the end of the day, we truly feel that the team that won was the best team in college basketball. But this is taking nothing away from the underdog teams, because everybody loves an underdog story. We get to underdog stories, and who cannot love this kid? The energy, the enthusiasm, the soft hands. I mean, he's a big body player that you can't get off the post, but yet he's not the biggest player, not the tallest player, not the longest player. But what really makes him exceptional is the passing out of the post, right? Zach needs to sort of learn from him and Joker. If he was a much better passer and more fluid, I think people would be considering him much more of an impact player in the NBA. Whereas at this point, people are questioning how he's going to be able to adapt to that game, which is obviously a lot more fast-paced, up and down, and a lot more based on athleticism, not necessarily skill. Not to say NBA players aren't skilled, but you know what I mean. For this young kid, wow, Burns, what a man. What a man. The irony with him is because he's a little undersized, even though I kind of see him a bit like a Draymond Green, right? If he can end up being more of a high post player, setting the pick, being able to continue to pass like he does, but also hit the occasional three-pointer, I think he can be a Draymond Green player. The question is, can he do what Draymond Green does on the defensive end? Obviously, he'd have to lose a few pounds to be a little more athletic and be able to get around a little better. But his footwork is incredible on the inside. And because of that, apparently NFL teams are now looking at him as a potential offensive tackle. So some options are available. He can end up probably not being drafted, but make a squad based on just skill set, intangibles, and hard work. Or he could potentially try to change sports and find a niche for himself. So it'll be interesting to see what he does next. But obviously, North Carolina has been a great story, especially with this kid who's the face of the squad. You can only hope for the best from them, but at the same time, they don't have the depth, the quality that a Purdue or a UConn have. So it's hard to see them actually winning it all. But people were saying the same thing about Jimmy Valvano's North Carolina State when they ended up running up to Houston's Pi Slamma Jamma back in the day. And I was a huge Houston fan. Clyde Drexler, Larry Mishaw, Akeem Olajuwon. And surprise, surprise, a late minute alley-oop to Lorenzo something. I can't remember. Sorry, Lorenzo. I can't remember your last name. Lorenzo Charles, who ended up throwing down an alley-oop dunk, which was actually just a short three-point jump shot to end up winning the game. Obviously, one of the best, Cinderella stories in basketball history. Can this North Carolina State do that? Can they emulate that team and end up surprising everybody? That's the story. And it's unlikely that they're going to be able to do it, but it's going to be fun watching in the meantime. Then, of course, we get to Alabama. And nothing against Alabama. As I say, I'm a supporter of the SEC, so I'm happy to see one SEC team represent. The irony is, this isn't the team that was supposed to get to the Final Four. This team wasn't seen as probably one of the top 3-4 teams in the SEC this year, right? Alabama last year was the team that people thought potentially could win the Final Four, with a high drafted NBA player who's playing fantastic right now, and obviously great depth and great chemistry. That team wasn't able to do that. Now this team has come out of nowhere and obviously doesn't have much pressure on them. They can just shoot their shot and hope for the best. And if they win, it's another Cinderella story that's going to get tons of attention. These guys are going to become household names, even though at this point, many people don't even know who they are. Whereas if they lose, it's not really going to be that big of a deal. They overperformed. They did well in this tournament. They can only feel proud for the way they performed. And because of that, expect them to be real loose in the semifinals. Then, of course, we get to women's basketball. And generally, I'm not a big proponent of female sports. It's not that I have a problem with it. I mean, if they have a elite athlete, then generally I do follow those people, and that does attract me, a little more to the sport. When we had Steffi Graf, obviously the Williams sisters, with golf, you had Wei, who was considered the female version of Tiger Woods there for a short period of time, and obviously other athletes as well. I mean, I watched the WNBA on its inaugural year with Cheryl Swoops, who I loved watching play. She was a fantastic player back in the day. But if you don't have stars, it's hard to get casual fans to really pay attention to. Even me, a huge boxing fan, and if you're not subscribed, you can go subscribe to my boxing channel, Sean on Boxing. It's similar. I mean, obviously, I watched Ali's daughter, who ended up becoming a world champion. And then there was a big gap from women's boxing until most recently, when obviously it's sort of become much more ingrained, kind of like women's basketball looks like potentially it may, specifically with the big boost is pushing now. Over 18 million people, I think, watched the LSU Iowa game, which is unreal. Unreal. I'm a huge boxing fan. If we could get 18 million people to watch any boxing event, that would be incredible. And at one time, that wasn't even a big number. But nowadays, I mean, boxing has become such a secondary sport that you're lucky if you get 1 million people watching. And 1 million actually is considered really good. So for these women to put up those kind of numbers, more power to them. And obviously, because of having a face like Caitlin Clark, that's helped generate. And also you had the rivalry between Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark, especially based on last year's sort of dynamic between the two of them specifically, where obviously it's a team sport, but media and people love a face to identify. UConn historically has been the face of women's basketball. UConn and Tennessee have dominated women's basketball for as long as I can remember. So it's no surprise to see the women's team from UConn here representing, especially with the fantastic player that they have in Paige Beckett. She is a great player. I watched her game, her last game, and was very impressed. I thought it was a great matchup between her and freshman sensation Juju Watkins. And at the same time, while I'm a big Juju Watkins fan, and I think she's probably my favorite college basketball player, she's so smooth, Kobe-esque, really a fun player to watch. And obviously her ceiling is huge. I was hoping that Paige would restamp her greatness in the women's game. She, coming out of high school, was considered, if not the best, equal to the best. Her and Caitlin Clark obviously had a competitiveness going at that point of their careers. And she came out and ended up winning Player of the Year her first year on UConn, which is incredible in itself. So I was really hoping that she would beat USC to end up getting to this game where we could see her and Caitlin Clark match up head to head. So things worked out perfectly. I think she performed great on both sides of the floor. Her defense, her rebounding. She's definitely a player who's giving her team everything they need, right? Obviously, UConn is very short this year. And when I mean short on injuries. So their bench is very short. So she's had to do a lot of things that maybe she wouldn't have had to do otherwise. And maybe we would have been able to see her play a lot more free. But at this time, she's needed to be an integral part of her team. So hats off to her. We also have the undefeated Gamecocks from South Carolina. Controversial coach, star-studded team full of 7 McDonald's All-American females. This is a team that's obviously already won multiple NCAA tournaments. And when you think about last year and this year, they've literally lost once in 73 games? 73 games, and they're 72-1. That's unbelievable. That shows you dominance. And that's what people get used to with women's basketball, this kind of dominant program that really sort of takes over, and the competition just isn't able to compete, whether it was a Tennessee with Holtzclaw, whether it was obviously a UConn with, a string of legendary female basketball players. For the Gamecocks, though, I mean, they have everything you need: depth, size, dominance in the paint and outside. They're a team that people expect to win. Going into this year and going into last year, people expect them to win. Until, of course, last year in the Final Four, they ended up meeting this team, Iowa. Caitlin Clark, rejuvenating interest in women's basketball. I have not seen so many people talk about women's basketball since probably Cheryl Miller. And if some of you are too young to remember that, Cheryl Miller, when she was leading USC with the McGee twins, was getting tons of press. Obviously, social media wasn't what it is today, so it's a little different. But she was considered better than her brother, Reggie Miller, right? And that was the kind of media push that was going out there consistently, talking about how great she was, that she was the better sibling in the Miller family, better than her brother Reggie, who obviously went on to become an all-star and had an incredible career in the NBA. But that's the kind of hype and attention she was getting. And obviously, she was the face of women's basketball, right, at that point. Whereas Caitlin Clark, she's in an NCAA that has tons of great players that we just named: Angel Reese, obviously Paige Beckett, Juju Watkins, and many more. And then you look at the WNBA, and it's just full of ex-superstar NCAA college basketball players who obviously are doing their thing in the WNBA. But it's great that this much attention has been put on female basketball, and for the right reasons. Not talking about not being paid fairly, sexism, transgender people playing in the game. None of these controversial woke topics, but just based on the play of these teams and the play of the women. And just that in itself is grabbing attention of casual sports fans. This is the matchup, as I was saying, that I was excited to see. I think it's going to be a great matchup. UConn, Iowa, Caitlin Clark, Paige Beckett. Whoever ends up going into the finals, I won't be sad or upset either way. I think both women are fantastic, and I'm equally interested to see how their teams are going to perform against South Carolina. Obviously, if Caitlin Clark's team, which last year upset the undefeated Gamecocks in the NCAA tournament, is able to duplicate that and once again beat this undefeated women's team to become the NCAA championship, that shit would be storybook. You could not write it better than that. Beating LSU to go into the Final Four, beating the best college basketball team in the world, in UConn women's basketball, to only then rematch South Carolina Gamecocks in second back-to-back years, both years undefeated until they met you. The difference is obviously this would be for the finals. This would be for the hardware. This would be for historical legacy. Some people are talking about how Caitlin Clark can't really be considered the GOAT of women's basketball because she hasn't won a title. But if she was to win a title in this way, coming through LSU, UConn, and then South Carolina, and winning those games back to back to back, at that point, you would definitely have to put her right into consideration. Not to say she's the best. As I said, I don't watch college basketball nearly that closely, so I'm the wrong person to put a value judgment on who is the best player of all time. But I can tell you that Caitlin Clark has definitely garnered more interest from me as a casual female basketball fan since anyone outside of Brittany Griner's dunks, because that was the only aspect of her game that really excited me, and Cheryl Miller, right, who people thought could play in the NBA, which obviously was a fallacy, but that was what people were saying at that time. Obviously, between those eras, you've had great players. I mean, I liked Holtzclaw a lot. I was a big fan of that Tennessee squad. I was happy for her to do so well. And what's her face? Why can't I remember her name? She's still playing, but she's still commentating a lot too. Beautiful woman. Oh my God, she's so beautiful. Candace Parker. Obviously, I'm a man, so if somebody is really attractive, that's obviously going to sometime get my attention as well. And for Candace Parker to be such a beautiful woman and such a great basketball player, obviously I was a fan of hers as well. But obviously that was not just because of her basketball skills. So excuse me, I am who I am. But outside of that, it's been an incredible tournament, specifically for girls basketball. I don't know if you can ever imagine this much attention being directed towards women's basketball. Obviously, last year, LSU and Caitlin Clark, Iowa game got tons of attention. This year, magnitude or magnified even more. It'll be interesting if these women can do what Larry Bird and Magic Johnson did. Bring this competitiveness, this rivalry into the WNBA and get the same kind of attention to help generate profits and generate eyes to the league, because that's what the WNBA is needed. Not the controversy, not the victimhood, but the players to actually grab casual fans' attention, right? Things worked out perfect. Obviously, Magic going to LA, Bird going to Boston, two completely very different squads, attracting a very different audience. And because of that, synergy was created. And it's kind of similar in this situation. I'm not sure what team Angel Reese is going to go to. And I'm not sure if it's going to be a big media team or not. I know that she's being talked about probably around 8th, 9th in the draft. Whereas obviously everybody knows Caitlin Clark is going to go to the Indiana Fever. But Indiana Fever is very similar to a Boston squad, right? The type of team that's going to get a lot of white, suburban, middle-class, casual sports fans' attention, right? Angel Reese goes to a bigger market, much more glitzy. Then you're sort of getting a similar situation to Magic in LA, Bird in Boston. And maybe it can have a similar type of impact on the WNBA. We'll see, hopefully. Obviously, there's lots of other great players as well, but you just need that one sort of key to bring attention to the league. And then people are going to notice the Dr. J's, right? They're going to notice the other great players that are in the league as well. So let's hope that this is the push that women's basketball needs to elevate the game and give these players more attention and obviously more opportunities. Obviously for Caitlin Clark, being offered a 3-on-3 deal from Ice Cube, man, he's got his fingers in everything, eh? I don't know the reality of that. I don't know if it would just be her playing a 3-on-3 against other women from the WNBA or how that would sort of work out. If it was that would be intriguing, interesting, specifically if you got the names of the WNBA. But as they were saying, if you're going to do that, you'd have to put it in a period where it didn't clash with the season, right? That is obviously something that they have to figure out, work out, and I mean, I think it's good if you can generate more eyes and more attention to players individually, which is then going to get more eyes on the league. That's just a win-win for everyone. The players that are pulled into 3-on-3 are going to get life-changing money, but then the attention the casual fans get pulled into is then going to gravitate towards the league as well, benefiting everybody. But let me know what you think. Leave your comments below. Thanks for watching. And remember to like, subscribe, and share. I look forward to more basketball conversations heading forward. Obviously, the NBA playoffs are just around the corner. We will be talking about that quite a bit. So stay tuned, participate. Remember to like, subscribe,